I'm Michael Jazorka. I am a lead cartoonist at Venice Arts, which is a nonprofit arts organization right here in Los Angeles. I've been with them for about 13 years. I've been self publishing my own comic books prior to that, about 5 years prior to that. So I've been making comic books for nearly 18 years now. And I love bringing our students, which are 10 to 18 in our workshops, through expressing themselves through comics as writers and artists. So I thought today I would give you a little bit of an insight on how we begin that process in crafting our visual story, because comics are a visual medium, but we have to consider the words and the combination of to really make the best stories. So what I'm going to bring you through today are a few things that we're
My
going to start
internet,
off.
my internet is tweaking right now.
It's literally tweaking.
So I'm going to share my screen here. Okay. So visual storytelling for comics, the Venice Arts way. What we'll cover today are using the storytelling craft. We'll break down the tortoise and the hare, and we're going to break down a student of Venice Arts' latest comic. So guys get to see a little insight on what the latest comic that we're making right now is. And then we're going to take a look at a storyboard template. I'm going to show you one of my own, and I'm going to show you a thumbnail layout page. And if we have time, we'll draw together using some shapes, because shapes are like the foundation of comics and drawing. So we'll do that together. If you want to look at more of our work, you can visit venicearts.org/comics, and you can see a whole gamut of all the books that we've made over the years, which is really cool. So let's look at the first tool that we use. I'm sure some of you are familiar with this. This is called the story pyramid. Now, what the story pyramid does is it crafts a 5-act play, which will construct in a pyramid sense, because we want to come up the mountain of our story and come back down. And we're going to talk about why the climax is so important in that idea. But our first panel we want to consider, and we're going to do the tortoise and the hare together, just so we can see how a story is crafted, is the exposition, which sets up our story nature of who we're with and why and what is going on, right? So in that first panel, we start to see our hare and our tortoise shaking hands. And we know the destination is to get this castle. We have a pointed finger coming up, and we want these. Basically, we're setting up our story play, right? We know the who, we're with the tortoise and the hare, we know where we are, and we know what's happening. So expo, think about expo and exposing, right? We use expo with some of our shows and our big events that we see here in our country. And expo is the same idea, to expose something. So that's what we're doing at the start of our story and our crafting. Now, as we come up that story pyramid, we start to see what's the complication. And we build that complication, and it could be done in a few different ways. It could be told in a few different panels as well. So in this case, for the tortoise and the hare, our complication starts to be seen when the race starts. And we can see clearly that the hare is kicking up dirt into the tortoise. And basically, we're starting to see that the tortoise is pretty slow on their journey. We further see that complication as we come up this rising action, that the bunny or the hare is getting further out. He's really winning this race. And we see the tortoise now is trailing behind. We're getting a sense of the depth here with the curvature of this road. It's helping us visualize the distance between these two. And then we hit the climax. The climax is so important in a story structure because it really is the change of the situation. So in the tortoise and the hare, we know that the change in the situation was that the hare fell asleep and took a nap. And really the tortoise took advantage of that, because the hare made that foolish choice to sleep during this special event. So the situation has now changed. The falling action takes us to our ending. And now we realize, and the bunny realizes, the hare realizes that, oh, I was sleeping. I got to go back to the race. While we know now that the tortoise has taken advantage of that situation, he's now off and about to win this race. The ending, of course, the tortoise wins. The tortoise took advantage of what the hare basically lost advantage of, right? We knew that the hare was faster, but he was a little foolish with taking his nap. So we get a sense now of really how this is crafted and how the story changes and why we use a pyramid to physically see and visualize how this nature of the story is crafted. Now let's take a look at one of my latest students' works. To give you a overview, we made a comic book. We're currently making a comic book about figures in action. We're calling it Figures in Action because we're telling stories about the inanimate object. So let's take a look at Theo's comic page together. We begin our exposition seeing New York City, 2022. It's just last year he created this. We see New York. We get a sense of the toy that's been left behind, our inanimate object that we're storytelling about. The next panel, we start to see a young man walking up while he's listening to music. He takes notice, and in the next frame, we notice that he grabs that toy. The scene breaks. It's the same man wearing a different outfit, and we can see that the toy is there on his desk, on his tabletop. How is everything this evening? Maybe the manager or the waiter asks. Time goes by, and we notice that the man is now leaving. And we see that a young boy has discovered this toy. Look, it's a toy. The scene breaks now, and we go to what seems to be a cruise line and people boarding that cruise line. And what do we know? Who's on the board? Who's boarded the cruise line? The same boy who found the toy in the previous panel. What happens? Oh, the toy gets lost. He drops it into the ocean. Now we come to see that the toy is coming down into the ocean water. We're not sure what's going to happen. But 10 years later, from our caption, we realize that another man now is approaching as this toy comes to shore. And surely the man grabs this toy at the end. Now, this is called a lineal descent story where the toy has traveled through several different ownerships. Now, this is a story prompt that we give our students. So if we break this down into a story pyramid together, we look at the various parts. We know that the exposition setup, our New York scene, and who we're with, our toy. Our complication arises when we know that our first owner finds the toy, and then we know that same first owner loses the toy shortly thereafter. So our complication is that the toy is getting lost. Now, this has almost a double complication because it's a lineal descent. It's kind of saying where this toy is going through its life. So our double complication is leading to our climax into that this is the last pair of hands that we see having this toy until we break down and take the situational change into seeing that the toy has now ended with this newest owner at the very end, only 10 years later. So the craft of the storytelling is done really to see that situational change, even in a story about an inanimate object going through the hands of ownership, right? This is the idea that the story is about if the toy could talk. So where do we go from the story pyramid? Well, we begin to craft what is called the storyboard. Now, storyboarding, I can show you this. Storyboarding is a lot like making thumbnails and making our panels. So we craft our panels into what are thumbnails. And these are tiny little, basically drawings that are used to plan out our panel sizes. So once we have the 5 panels from our pyramid, we can begin to advance what other panels are needed in between those spaces, right? So we started off with just 5, and then we craft out, as Theo did here in his tale, more panels. Now, in that, we have to think about the format and how big the space we have with our comic is. So that's why the thumbnail layout is so important, because it's actually drawn really small. And I'm going to share with you mine. Switch my camera here. And that should work. And take a look. This is my story thumbnail page. Now I'm crafting an entire comic book from this. So really the importance of using small drawings like this is to not only be efficient and create those pages more efficiently with drawing less, but also that we're planning for our dialogue and how that is arranged in the page layout. So we're going from 5 panels up to, per page, about 10 panels. So it takes a little bit of advancing that process with going through stages. So once we have this stage created, we can then go in and create the final comic page, which we've seen together here, which was Theo's. Now, one of the most important things about making comics is crafting basically from shapes. So I wanted today to draw with you guys and see that importance. And I thought we would draw the profile head together, because it's a little tricky, but really it's a square shape. And if we work through it together, you guys can see how cool shapes help our making of any kind of object, especially the human form. So if you have a pencil and a paper and a ruler, I'd like you to get that out now, okay? And we'll go in and we'll look at what this entails. I'm going to switch my camera. Okay, let's see. Okay, so grab your paper. Now, if you have a ruler, that'd be great, because you do want to make your square as clean as possible. But if you have to freehand it, it's okay too. Okay, so don't worry about that. But take your ruler, and you're going to create a simple square. How do we know it's a square? Every side is the same, right? And try to make that as clean as you can. Nice and straight lines. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to cut that in half with a horizontal line, and we're going to cut that in half with a vertical line. Now from here, what we want to do is consider what side our face is going to lie on. Now I'm going to pick this side for my face. So the first line I'm going to create is actually the top of the head. And it's going to fit right in the middle of this spacing. So feel free to turn your page to get the nice curve line. So I'm just giving it a simple curved line coming down, not too far into this space. The next thing we're going to do is create a line that comes down and is going to be the front of our face. Now this line is a lot longer, and it's going to touch down right at this middle point. It's like every line I'm going to bring that line out and bring it back in. Now, as I bring that back in, I'm going to hook that because this is going to be our chin. And I'm going to bring that chin line up to the next thing we're going to do is we're going to bring out the back of the head with a more bulbous shape than we have here. So I'm going to carry that now. I'm going to go as thick as the square is. Here's the difference. I'm coming in sharper, and I'm going to stop in the middle of the square.
Oh my God.
We have culinary during high school lunch in D9, soccer during high school lunch in the gym.
The next thing, we're going to add our neck. So our neckline is going to continue down from the back of this head.
The 2026 junior senior prom will be on Saturday.
The next line we're going to add is
I
in
told
the
her that
midway
yesterday.
of
Today and tomorrow are picture.
the neck.
Okay, guys, announcements are happening. You're not talking.
Now we've set up our figurehead shape here. So the first thing we're going to put in terms of features on the head is the ear in the midway. And we know that it's at the X point. So you can make this ear right in the center of your character head. The next thing we're going to do is putting in our eyeball. Our eye is going to fall back right into the head here. Now the eyeball isn't going to look like a circle in this perspective. It's going to look more like a dash or a half circle. Now that lives on that center line. The next line we're going to add is the eyelid.
Somebody in here is unmuted.
Notice how the eye is right in the middle now of this shape. So what we're going to note now is our nose is actually going to come off this shape. And I'm going to work my line off of...
I cannot be. Candace is a ball.
So extend your nose out.
I gotta go, guys. God, I gotta go. I gotta go.
And then I'm going to bring my nose back into my head. Our next marker is going to be halfway from the nose to the chin, which is our mouth. Now that's a closed mouth if I give it a simple straight line. But I, of course, can add a little bit more of an expression, bringing the mouth back and into the face. Now with that comes a creasing of our cheek and also a note of where our cheekbone is. So our cheekbone line is also going to live inside that shape. So now if I go in with my eraser and I begin to let go of my guidelines, you guys can go in and kind of get rid of most of your square here if you want now. Especially on the outside. We're not going to need those guides. There we go. A little better. Now, I have my mouth. Now, what I have to note is that from my nose, I'm going to have a little bit of a bulbousness into my mouth shape, right? You're going to see the lip. Not only the top lip, but we're going to see the bottom lip in the same idea. We could consider that our character is male or female with the eyebrow, especially the male's living more closer to the eye and a female's living higher up on the forehead. So we can make that note with creating what kind of eyebrow we want to create. So I'm going to make mine a man. Now the next thing we're going to note is our shapes for our hair. So our hairline usually comes up just as the top of the forehead starts to come into play. So I'm going to make a note by drawing a line that comes down from that to the basically to the front of the earway, right? And another line we're going to add in here is going to come to the back. And now it goes a little bit to the lower neckway. Now this is where it gets fun, because not only are we fashion artists and we're designers in comics, but we're hairstylists too. So here's your chance to make hair on top of the head. Now, if we want to consider volume, we're going to draw up off of the head to create the volume of this hair. So I'm going to lift my line from my hair point and draw now what is the volume contour line of my head. And with hair, I like to say that the contour line on the outside is suggesting what kind of line nature is living on the inside of the hair. So if I give my character some pretty nice long hair here and continue it to where it should be, if I take my eraser now and take out my guidelines, what we start to see is that hair starts to really come together. Now, things we note is that where the hair meets the head, we often have those points of where our hair could poof up. So I can give it lines of where the front of our head meets our forehead and give it natured kind of lines that I've already created on the outside working with these. So I might break a line and continue the same kind of wavy shaping that I've been creating. Now, the rule of thumb with hair and using less lines is you're going to get more volume out of using less lines. So I'm adding kind of lines that match the nature of my contour of my hair, just kind of simplifying it. This wavy hair. We can go into the ear now and create our ear canal lines. Now, this is a part where you can be expressive with this, because a lot of people have different types of ears and ear lines going on in there. Some artists use less, some artists use more lines to express that part. So that's really up to you. If I go in now and create or erase the rest of my layout, we start to see the human form, right? And the finished drawing a little bit more. So just like we build up in stages with our storytelling in Venice Arts, we build up the shapes in our characters and everything we draw. So if I see a student struggling with drawing a profile head view, we get into the square and I show them how we break that down. So everything in shapes and drawing can be broken down by the use of those shapes. Now, let's just say I need to make another character, but it's not a human. What do I do? Well, I could use the basis of the layout of this to create another type of character. I would just change the shapes. So if I do that really quickly with you and create my square, just say I need to make another character, but it's not a human. What do I do? Well, I can use the basis of the layout of this to create another type. Creating my square the same way we did before. Now, these are pretty light lines. I'm only drawing them heavier so you guys can see them. But when you start that layout, these should be very light. And then the lines that we go in are going to be a lot harder because we want to see them more clearly. So again, I'm going to make my layout of my head, start with my top of my head. I'm picking the side of which is my face is falling on by guiding that line down into our square. I'm bringing my chin down and I'm hooking it up. Bringing the back of my head into play. This is more bulbous. And I end that line in the inside of that fourth quarter. Bring my neck down, bring my neck down. Now, as I was saying, if I'm not drawing a human, I could still use the makeup of this to draw anything else that I want, right? I can make any kind of character from this head positioning because I know that the ear has the placement in the middle, and I'm just going to make a big kind of bunny ear on my character here. Because I know that this is the center of the head. This is where we could possibly see a new character generated ear, right? And I'm just going to go in and erase my guides as I need to here. I'm going to make my inner ear lines. If I want to get expressive with the nose, let's say, now I can kind of build off of what that might be. Doesn't have to be my standard human nose, though it could be. We could think differently. So I'm going to think a little differently and say, my character's got this kind of rounded, cartoony nose, maybe. Kind of sausage-like. Erase my guide. How about the mouth? I got to come in here and maybe we can now create a unique mouth shape coming into where we know where the mouth lives. So I'm going to express my mouth a little bit differently than I did on my human. Maybe mine's got a little aggression to them. But see how I'm just keeping the same spacing going? How about my eye? Now my eye doesn't have to live on the line, right, for my new character because it's not human. So I can make my eye now in a different form. But I need to keep note that this is profile view. So my eyeball is still going to live in presenting itself to this way, right? So my eyelids are going to live in these half crescent kind of shaping, right? Because this is the side of the face. So now if I go in and express that, I'm now creating more of a unique form. Now I don't have to follow the forehead either. I can make this into a different shaping. So maybe I just want to say that I have more of a noted brow here on my character. And I could bring out that shape and change that a little bit too here. The hair could live differently too, but the same rules kind of follow because I still need the hair to wrap around the head. So I can put my guideline in of my hair and now ask myself, okay, how expressive do I want to make this shaping of my hair? Well, maybe I'll make it spiky this time. So I'm going to give it spike kind of nature. And I'm just building off of the back shape, right? Because there's more volume off of the head than creating it directly on the head. So erase my guides. Clean up my line. And now I might want to ask myself, okay, I'm going to fill in my hair black on my character here. Why not? Let's get some contrast going, right? Push out the character form, especially if it's going to live in black and white. So now I have like a little bit of a unique kind of troll-like character, don't I? But I use the layout of the human form to really make that and build off of it. So knowing some of these foundations, especially drawing the human form and getting the shapes down, you can really go into other areas of creation, right? So let's look at other creations that we've made at Venice Arts. I'm going to share my screen again. I'll do the entire screen. Actually, yeah. Okay. So if we look at more, so here's our thumbnail page. This was Theo's. We also made a comic book for the DWP through our organization. It was called Energy Vampires and Water Goblins. We were trying to hope to really get our readers into seeing the importance of energy and water conservation. So we came up with water goblins and energy vampires to really tell us those kind of stories with everyday people. So a story we did was one about ducks, the air ducts in our houses. And did you know that air ducts should be made or should be fixed with not just regular duct tape? You're supposed to use sealant. So this character goes through having leaky ducts and only to be introduced to the proper use of fixing those ducts and fixing them up to reduce heating efficiency with an energy vampire that comes out of his duct. So this was a creative way for us to make a comic book that informs our reader of how to save water and energy. And this was done, I believe this was done by a 11-year-old student. Now you're looking at the color here and you're thinking that must be computer. And it's true. The color is done with computer software, Photoshop, and Procreate on iPad. But the hand-drawn line is all made with ink. So my students not only hand draw, but they ink their final page, and we scan that into a multimedia art piece. So not only is this hand-drawn line ink, but it's digital color and digital lettering, as well as digital bubbles. So we can really focus on the artwork and then make the text nice and clean and legible in our stories. Check out the exposition in this story, right? Seeing the home and where we are, right? And then we're witnessing the complication. How does the complication change? The vampire shows up and says, hey, that's not how you're supposed to do that. That's not what you use, right? So, and it has a funny ending here. This wealthy person comes by and says, hey, here's some bucks. And basically now the character who had the leaky duct says, now I can save enough money to buy my own private limousine because he's saving money on his energy, right? So that was a fun way to kind of bring that tale together. So that's an Energy Vampires and Water Goblins. Another comic we did was called A Constant Wind and Windy. We actually we're not transcribed, but we listened to music and we made comic books or comic stories on 2 different songs. One was called A Constant Wind, which was an instrumental by
If this is live.
Johnny Pate, and the other one was called Windy. And Windy was by a woman who actually lives here in Venice, Ruth Ann Friedman Carlisle. And so we took those stories and interpreted them into song interpretations. So
Michael, one quick second. I'm sorry. Your screen is frozen, so we can't see what you're referring to.
Oh, okay.
We just see your previous still video.
Oh, okay. Let me reset what we're looking at here. Let's see if this works. Can you guys see this?
We can't. It's like it's frozen for some reason. See if you can stop sharing your screen and reshare.
Sure. Am I back now?
We still just see the frozen part where you. Okay, we just saw something move.
Okay.
Is that your video or are you sharing your screen?
How about now? You guys see this?
We don't. That is weird. We don't see anything right now. We just your frozen image.
Okay. Well, while we wait for that to come back, I would love to take questions if anybody has any. And I'll go back to my regular camera here.
Okay.
Does anybody have any questions about how we process our comic storytelling at Venice Arts?
All right. If there are any questions, you guys can either ask them out loud or put it in to the chat. There's some that's coming into the chat, Michael. Are you able to see
How do
that?
you come up, how do you come up with the titles? That's a great question. You know, our stories that we work are in theme. So when we work in a particular theme, we think about and we dissect really what we're trying to say in that theme. So like the action figure comic book that we're working on now, we ended up kind of brainstorming what would be a good title just to draw in someone to think about what this book is, which also makes a great title because it leads us and the potential reader to be inquisitive about what that book is about. So calling it Figures in Action was our way to kind of highlight that we're doing stories on figures, but it's not necessarily the same type of stories. Because the other themes that the students are playing in, beside lineal descent, are a stories of having a memento in our story, meaning that the object has a memory associated to it, which is really interesting. And then the other one is idealization. What if a character has a broken toy? How do they tell a story about them being in love with a broken toy? What kind of challenges could they have with of having a devotion to something that might be imperfect to other people? So those are themes that we play in as writers, and then we ask ourselves, really, what's the best title for that? Which is always a lot of fun to brainstorm with the class. So that's a great question. Thank you for that, Giovanni. How do you come up with certain character designs? Well, characters and designs of characters, like I just showed you with the shapes and forms there, you really have to have the basis of knowledge of the shapes of different character forms to really build from. And once you get into that, you really just want to explore those features and make sure those features are identifiable, even in silhouette. Some creators say that the best characters can be identified in a simple form. So, what other way to see something than a silhouette and break that down? Um, so really building from shapes and building from really the story you're trying to tell. So, if a character has a particular struggle, or there's a particular characterization to the character that you want to design around, so we get the feeling of the empathy that we want the character to have through the reader, or the identification of that character is done through the physical form a lot of the times in cartooning. So we create from those specifics. So really you're basing it on what you're trying to tell in the story and what kind of character that is. Layla, you asked, how do you draw something that has more of both the sides of the face, but is still side profile, like more 3D? Well, that's really changing out, and I'll just do a quick sketch here, and I'll just show you it. It's changing out how the shapes live. So instead of drawing that character in a complete profile, I'm going to turn that face out and use the same guidelines that I was using in that square form now on that face. So this is called a 3/4 view. I think this is what you're asking of me. And yeah, that's more 3D than a flat profile. But a flat profile can still look 3D, right? As long as we use the features within inside that form, especially on the profile view, because that's what happens. Our features get flattened to our head, but we can still add a nice gradual change of line to offer a three-dimensionality to that viewpoint. Let's see. Any other I missed? Do I think it's important to study human anatomy to understand where things go? Absolutely, definitely. But there's a lot of books that show you how to simplify that anatomy and make it more accessible when beginning to draw that. So I would suggest there's a book called Drawing the Figure by Jack Hamm, Hamm. It's a great book about learning how to draw a figure simply. And he'll show you how to do what's called weight distribution or contrapposto, which is a way to make a human form really take weight and stand in that environment as a 3D character. So it's up to you of really how much you want to go into the formal aspects of knowing where the spine is and all the muscles are living on your characters. That's up to you and how much you want to invest into that process. I'll say this though, as someone who's still drawing the figure a lot, it's never ending. You never really finalize how you do it. It's you get presented with the new challenge and you grow into how to draw that challenge, right? And how to draw that figure. So um, that's what comics is. It's a lot of challenge because you're combining a lot of different elements together: perspective, anatomy, body language, um, expressions, uh, dialogue, all these things that have to come into play to get the proper information across. I always tell my students the most important thing is creating clarity in comics, because if you don't make a clear story, then you've lost your reader. And if you've lost your reader, then you may not be a storyteller because you really want to keep your reader. You want them to stay engaged. You want to leave them with an impression in the story. So that involves the setup, the exposition being just right, seeing who we're with and what their challenges are. We're seeing their challenge and we're seeing how that challenge changes, right? To get the growth. How does it end up, right? What are we getting out of this challenge that the character is going through? Can this profile technique work with other art styles? Yeah, definitely. I think especially if you're drawing the figure or drawing a character and a character head, absolutely. Do I know how to 3D model? No, that's not specifically what I do typically in my time. I'm more interested about using shapes on my own and discovering where those fit in that process. How can you get a job making comics professionally? That's a great question, B. Really, it's building a portfolio, just like any other placement of a job in the workplace. You have to build a body of work that, whether is published or unpublished or unsolicited, meaning it's coming in from outside and it doesn't have an existence into the scripts or the nature of characters that existing company has, but they could see that you are crafting stories around what might work for their characters is a smart thing, because you want to match what's the house style. Say if you're going after Marvel or DC, each of these have their own kind of look, and they can pair you up with a writer in that instance as well if you don't want to go in as a writer artist, or someone who just pencils and inks. You have to create a portfolio, usually around 20 pieces. And a lot of the times they like to see a finished book involved in that portfolio. But you bring that portfolio to conventions. I know that sounds wild, but there are people who take in portfolios to review at conventions. And that is your opportunity to get real time feedback on your work as someone looks at it. And that's really a great way to do it, and get into the industry. Now, there are plenty other ways to get involved in that, but really make a great portfolio, have a great piece of body of work. Let's see. How can you draw a front profile without making it look weird? Whenever I try it, it looks funky. Well, That's the thing about setting up your guidelines on your head. You really have to be in accordance to where those body parts and those features live into the relationship of each other, and in that creating a balance of drawing the same looking eye and the symmetry of the face takes a little bit of little time. So you just have to keep working your guidelines and understanding where those features lie and the relationship of those features together. Again, getting great books on drawing the figure is really the key, and seeing how each of these different authors go about explaining that process. How do you figure out where to put text? Well, text in comics, we have to consider reading a comic from left to right, top to bottom. That's the nature of the experience in American art comics form. So with that in mind, we have to consider that the bubbles are actually leading the eye around the page. So with the visuals, because the visuals are actually guiding our eye just as much as reading the bubbles are. So a lot of the times it's about and where those can be put so that when reading that comic strip, let's say in a particular format, we know where our eye is to go in that process. So, but the Bible of it all is left to right, top to bottom, right? That's the way we craft how to read that experience. Where do we get your book? That was a private thing to me. Well, I get my comic books are sold through my website. It's bombshell-comics.com. So you can look at them there. Yes, Jack Ham drawing the figure, and it's Hamm. That's the book name. Is doing 3D drawings hard? I mean, it takes time, like anything else. To get good at it, you have to work those shapes over and over again, right? It's there's a bit of it, especially with comics, because you're redrawing the same characters again and again. But really, in actuality, you're trying to get the most accurate you can in that idea. It's really hard to get it absolutely perfect, but you can fool your reader's eye and your own eye that you're drawing that same character the same over and over again, because you're using the same makeups and the same relationships of those lines. So it becomes magic. It's a fool of the eye cartooning. How can you make your readers feel the emotion like you would feel watching a movie? Well, that's going back to the story pyramid. Really, it's setting up a story that is interesting, and that where the climax, where the situation changes, is really that growth model. That's how you want to look at it. So when you craft your story, think about where that situation is changing in your story and how it's going to live with your reader. Because not only it has to live with the character that's going through that struggle, but your reader's going to read it and they're going to remember that character and what they went through. And that's the goal of that, to make that a cohesion, right? And to make it an impressionable experience. And that is really done with the setup and how interesting that character is, the challenge, and how they get through that challenge, and who or what they do and get through that, and really where they live with that at the end in the denouement, right? It's coming to that placement of growth in that story. So it's just like a movie. So when you're watching a movie, try to find the climax and note it in your head and see where that is living in the whole scope of the story. And you'll find it's not a lot of the times that that climax is at the middle of the tale. It could be at the far end, it could be at the front end. So that's depending on the storyteller and what type of story they're trying to tell. What kind of pens do you use for inking? I can never find good pens. My favorite are using nibs. They look like this. Now, nibs are basically tightly woven fabric uh, into a point. And these have different sizes. This is Micron by Sakura. I love these. They go a long way. They are a little expensive, but you can get them at most art stores, Blick. You can also usually get them at some bookstores too, like Kinokiya, that specialize in like manga, because a lot of manga artists use these Japanese pens. They're incredible. I love them, and they have different sizes, and they're very forgiving on your line, and they're very slick, and they last quite a while. But you're paying almost $4 a pen on that, so you have to consider your budget for buying those. How long do you work on a comic? Malachi asks. Well, for the workshop, we work on it for an entire year. We do two we do two 12-week classes that run once a week. So essentially, the students have 24 2-hour classes to make a comic book in our workshop. Me myself, I've made comic books from anywhere from months on end to years. My longest book I made was 3 years. It took, and it was 100 pages. It was full color. So I gave myself that kind of a challenge. It's an endeavor you have to love, really, bookmaking, because it involves a lot of time. What if I'd like to create an original comic? I think that's a great idea, Jasper. How would I draw longer hair? Well, longer hair, you got to look at really how it's falling and living on the head, Layla. So as I was showing you with the guidelines of where your hairline meets your head, you want to build from that. Allow that to be the core of the foundation of the shape. And from that, then you build off of the head and craft. So look at any kind of pictures of fashion and hair, and see how this hair lies, or look at your own hair and see how it falls in particular to your own face, and see if you can kind of line that up. Cinematic angles can also help with making your comic feel like a movie. Yep. Focus on how it would be shot if it was a movie. Yeah. Um, Really, a lot of the shots that we see in movies, they actually give us an emotional effect, right? Working a high angle above a character is showing a little bit of dominance and that the character is a little bit vulnerable, right? But making the character feel large and being underneath them is giving them dominance and power. So there's an inversion, really, of different ways to consider your shots in your stories. Should I study older comics to give me ideas and of dialogue bubbles? Yeah, definitely. Any era of comics is great. We often read a lot of older comics in my class because they are what are called standalone stories. So you can really get that whole experience. A lot of modern comics, they want you to buy the next issue, and they're looking for you to stay on board, just like any of our movie streams and our series streams are on our television. They're trying to get you to kind of stay engaged to see how the story unfolds. So a classic comic book, usually they were trying to get readers in one copy and gain a full story in that one copy. So if you really want to learn, I think the best, you really want to find those single standalone, they call them, stories that are living in comics. I hope that helps, Violet. Do I know how to draw braids? Yeah. So braids are really kind of like a shaping, right? They're kind of intertwined type of hair. So when you simplify line and you simplify shape, you really just have to look at those relationships of those lines to really kind of gain a sound knowledge into seeing how they are interpreting as that braid or as that texture, because there certainly are shapes and textures and forms that get a little tricky to break down into line. But knowing that your smallest line is a dot, right? And knowing your longest line can be as long as your page or your paper, you have a lot to play with in terms of the nature of those combinations. So it's a lot of the times, and even like what I was talking about with drawing the hair, it's almost like drawing less is more in cartooning because we're suggesting the nature of that, right? It's bringing across that communicative energy. Have any tips on drawing hands? Yeah, absolutely. Hands are usually crafted in my workshop. I teach it as thinking about the mitt. So that simple form of the shape of the hand at its simplest, and then building the appendages and the fingers off of that. Now, of course, you have bending and knowing how a hand can live in the way it bends. So really, you're working into seeing it as a mitt first, and then defining those fingers within that shape. Again, there's great books on that. How do you show the movement of more complex InDesign characters? Well, movement again is going into figure drawing and understanding weight distribution and how the hips actually counteract with the weight that your feet are presenting and how you're standing. And your shoulders work into taking that weight. So if you want to draw a realistic character, you got to look into contrapposto, it's called, or weight distribution. Look into that online. There'll be some examples. How do you know how to draw detailed eyes? Well, detailed eyes, going into referencing again, you can look at your own eye in your mirror and look at the shapes that are going on in that. There's so many different eye shapes and eyelid shapes, but really the eye lives within your eyelid. So that's one thing a lot of us forget as artists, is that our eyes live within our in our head and in our eyelids. So our eyelids often show the shape of our eye. So getting good reference and seeing how other artists simplify or exemplify that detail is really in the nature of choosing how you might want to go about drawing an eye. Blending, how do I blend colors to make it realistic? Well, that's another thing with really color use and using layers and building color from layers and understanding that color has different values, right? The hotness of a color versus the coolness of a color, and how they interact with each other is a makeup of really the chemistry of color. So I would suggest looking into color theory if you really want to get into the realistic nature of light and value and contrast, right? Seeing all of that work together will bring across realistic tones. How to draw the body? Drawing the body again, going into the nature of the shapes, the forms. The upper torso and the bottom torso of a body is very important to discover when thinking about your weight distribution. So look up contrapposto and drawing the figure. How do I recommend someone to try to find their art style? Honestly, guys, just eat up what you like and draw a lot and draw how your favorite artists do certain things. It doesn't mean draw just like them and try to be them, but try to learn from them and create what might be your own from your influences. Because what will end up happening is all your influences, that none of them will look like you in the end, but you will look like a lot of them, which is really cool. How do you use shadow correctly? Well, shadow, there's different ways of thinking about shadow. Of course, you have to think about the sun, especially for outdoors. But for indoors, you have to think about artificial light, right? Lamps and how those different lights interact with the forms that you're creating. So if you're considering outdoor, you might want to think about how the sun lives to the horizon and how close that is to the horizon, because the closer the sun is to the horizon, the longer the shadow form is. And the higher it is, like high noon, as it gets in our sky, the smaller that shadow gets underneath that form. So there's particular formalities that come into considering shadowing. Oh, good. I'm glad you like all my answers. Why do some artists make their first sketches for comics in colored pencil? You probably see that because they're using what our blue line, which is a basically approach where you draw in blue line and then you ink on top of it, and then you scan that artwork in, and the blue line doesn't get picked up by a printer because you can put it on a non-photo mode. So there's a reason for the colored pencil you might see in that sense. But the other sense they might draw in colored pencil is just to differentiate that line art that much more than the next stage that they're going to do in that process. So you're defining that process with seeing it in real time, and you're chronicling it as you create it. So you're getting the makeup in the red color pencil, let's say, and then you're inking a black line on top of it to finalize it. When you draw, let me see. Yeah, we're close to the end, guys. I'm glad you guys learned a lot from this. Um, Check out Venice Arts. I'm also going to say, I'm just going to share one more thing. And hopefully you can see this. Get involved with more at the 4th Annual Grid, guys. There's 21 workshops that you guys could participate in over the next 2 days, Thursday and Friday. The link to Filmocracy will provide them access, right? So you go onto that site, festival.filmocracy.com/grid, and you can check out the schedule also at creativitymatters.com. And then you can follow Grid on Instagram. So at the Grid Summit. So you guys can stay involved. Check out these workshops, guys, and see what you learn. And I'm happy you came here to check out what Venice Arts does and look into our website and get inquisitive. This is what makes art great and fun and interesting to all of us. Thank you so much, Violet. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Lori. It's been a pleasure, guys. Keep cartooning, draw every day, get the good books that you need to grow, and you will do it. Just do it every day. Thank you, guys, so much. It's been a joy. Enjoy the rest of the 4th Annual Grid. Great. Thank you, Giovanni.